Now, if you're like me last night, you're sitting back watching another cracking episode of Paul Murray Live, then you hear there's one new infection in Victoria and that Daniel Andrews is going to be doing a late night press conference, and you're filled with a foreboding, thinking this guy is going to lock down the whole state again. He didn't, but he said this.
This is one case. There's no need for people to panic. There's no need for people to be alarmed. We, Victorians, know what to do, and we have proven as a state very successful at managing these sorts of outbreaks, these sorts of issues.
Yep, I'm calling a 10:30 p.m. press conference telling people not to come back to work as they were going to do on Monday, go and get tested, but don't panic. Still, it's better than we expected. Let's find out what the Victorian Liberal leader, the opposition leader, Michael O'Brien, thinks about it. Michael O'Brien, you're pretty supportive of what Daniel Andrews actually has done in response to this infection.
Yeah, good afternoon, Chris. Look, comparing it to perhaps other state leaders further west, we didn't want to see Melbourne locked down. We didn't want to see Victoria locked down. What I want is for Victoria to be able to remain as open as possible. It is just one case. And if Daniel Andrews has finally learnt the lessons of his failures of contact tracing from last year, from 2020, then there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to stay relatively open. So credit where it's due. He could have gone the Mark McGowan approach. He didn't, and I do support that. But the question is, how did hotel quarantine again provide an infection into our community? We were assured they had learnt the mistakes of last time, and we were assured that wouldn't happen.
There's no doubt that Daniel Andrews completely mangled hotel quarantine last year and it was leaking like a sieve. But you must concede that no matter how stringent you are with hotel quarantine, given the highly infectious nature of coronavirus or COVID-19, there will be episodes. We need to expect that the virus will escape now and then. We just need to be able to pick it up quickly and quash it, as it seems is happening in this case.
Well, the Premier is very keen on telling us that he's now the gold standard. He's now the leader, or Victoria's the leader in the country under his changes. So, in fact, I think you'll find that his ministers have been very bullish about assuring Victorians we would not get hotel quarantine infections getting out into our community. Now, the question remains, how did that happen? And if we can't answer that question, Chris, then that means the danger remains. The failure, the flaw in the system that allowed this to happen once could allow it to happen again. So I'm not calling for panic either. All I'm saying is clearly something went awry. We need to find out what it is so we can stop it happening again.
At this stage, is there anything that you say you would have done differently?
Well, Chris, look, I think that more on contact tracing is important, more on testing is important. I think the government could have been a lot more upfront about getting this information out. We know that the government knew about this by early afternoon yesterday. We know that because members of the Country Fire Authority were formally advised to go and get tests by 3:41 p.m. Now, if the government knew about this outbreak that early in the day, why did it take the Premier until 10:30 or afterwards to let Victorians know? You get the impression it was really more about stage management and media management than it was about getting the information out in a timely way.
There's been a bit of commentary about the Australian Open, about how many people have been coming into quarantine for that. This is linked indirectly to that. Now, I think we've got to get back to trying to live as normal as possible, and I think it's a good thing that Victoria is trying to stage the Australian Open as per normal. What's your view on that? Was it a mistake? Is the risk too high?
Look, no, Chris, I'm a big supporter in recovery, in bouncing back, in trying to get this state and this country back up off its knees from where we were last year. So I have said I support the Australian Open taking place. The only caveat is, has the government fixed up the debacle that was hotel quarantine last time? Have they fixed up the debacle that was contact tracing and testing last time? If they've got that right, there's no reason for the Australian Open not to go ahead. It's important confidence boost, it's important jobs and economic boost for the state and for the country. So I do support our major events, but it's got to be paired by a government that is competent when it comes to hotel quarantine, testing and contact tracing.
Well, there's been a pretty low bar set. We've had Anastasia Palaszczuk lock down Brisbane over one case. We've had, of course, Mark McGowan lock down Perth over one case. We've had your Liberal colleague in South Australia, Stephen Marshall, lock down South Australia over a dozen or so cases. Are you encouraged that maybe Daniel Andrews is learning to manage this thing a little bit more like Gladys Berejiklian, and he's actually, prepared to actually take some proportionate risks and not just focus on lockdowns and elimination?
Look, I live in hope, Chris. I live in hope. I think Gladys Berejiklian has demonstrated that you can save lives and save livelihoods. You don't have to close down a state at the first sign of a sniffle. You do have to have good contact tracing, and they've done that well in New South Wales, and they've been proportionate. I think that is the lesson for other states, for other leaders. And I do hope that Daniel Andrews has learned. And I'm not going to be churlish. If he had overreacted last night, I'd be the first to call him out. I actually think what he's done is relatively proportionate, and I'll say so.
Now, Michael, there's been more speculation about your hold on the Liberal Party leadership. Is there anyone else in your team who might be better able to lead the opposition?
No, look, I was elected by my colleagues unopposed, Chris, after the last election, and I was elected unopposed because my colleagues know that the next election is going to be about rebuilding Victoria, and who better to do that than a former Treasurer who delivered surpluses, unlike the current government, a former Treasurer who helped Victoria create more jobs than any state in the country, unlike the current government that's lost 200,000 jobs. The next election will be about rebuilding Victoria, and there's no question that I and the Liberal Party are the best placed team to do that.
You don't feel a bit like Albo at the moment, like there's a bit of the knives are out for you?
No, look, there's no doubt that in a pandemic, people tend to focus a bit more on governments than on oppositions. I understand that. My job is to hold this Premier and this government accountable where they get things wrong, and to offer a better alternative to Victorians. Our election is, we've got fixed terms. It's not till November next year. I want to talk about getting this state back, getting us to where we should be. I hate the idea that Victoria is just going to be accepting higher than average unemployment for the next 4 years. But that's what the Labor government's budget predicts. To my mind, that's not good enough. We should be better than that. And if we start having a business-led, economic growth-led recovery, we can do that. And that's what I want to offer Victorians.
Michael, thanks a lot for joining us again.
Thanks, Chris.
Michael O'Brien there, the Liberal leader and opposition leader in Victoria.